media and on the in all newsrooms, in fact, about how coronavirus, or as we call it, the Wuhan virus, has been manufactured and developed by China as a bioweapon. History is replete with all these incidents. It's nothing new for the world as such, developing the weapons of mass destruction. In 2003, if I can recollect, Iraq was invaded and bombarded by the US on the pretext that it held stockpiles uh, of, uh, of WMDs. Uh, Syria, again, is generally accused of using chemical weapons on its people and the rebels. Uh, Another part of it is that CBRM it also consists of, it has other segments as well. So if I can say that Vizag 2020, that is last year, saw a big gas leak in which a lot of people died. Not too long or too long back, I think it was Bhopal gas tragedy, again, which took a lot of lives and a lot of suffering. And Chernobyl, of course, cannot be forgotten by the world. In 1986, Russia had a major accident in its Chernobyl plant. Now, why I'm telling all this is because all this is a part of the CBRN regime. Now, what is CBRN? CBRN is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Um, it relates not just to defense strategies, but it is also a part of disaster management and the industrial infrastructure. Now, COVID in the recent days has been the most deadly of the CBRN substances, I think. Not that we've had SARS and Ebola and MERS in the earlier times also, which have also been great pandemics but remain basically largely to a part of geographical part of the world. But the last 2 years, we've seen 1.5 year rather, we've seen so many people dying of coronavirus. With me today is a CBRN expert, Dr. Colonel Ram Athavale, who is joining me from Pune. He is one of the few CBRN experts, not in India, but in the world itself. He's advisor to the government of India on CBRM, as also to the European Union CBRN risk mitigation centers of excellence. He's a recipient of the he's the recipient of the Chief of Army Staff Commendation. He's also the advisor to the government of Eastern and Central Africa on CBRN risk mitigation matters. He's a retired Indian Army officer and who's taken part in Operation Parakram. And before hanging his boots, he was director of CBRN at Directorate of Prospective Planning. Welcome, Dr. Athavale, to Nation Talks. I would start by asking,
Thank you, Preeti.
What is CBRN security or oblique threat? Why is it important, and what is the need for it?
Preeti, firstly, I must thank you for inviting me to talk to you on this very important subject, and for the humble words you have said about me. CBRN, like you mentioned, stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Now, earlier days, the term used to be NBC, or nuclear, biological, and chemical. At the time, we were not too worried about, or we were not too aware about the radiological threats which are there in our pits. And therefore, the term had only N, B, and C in it. During the Gulf War period, the new term was coined by the Americans, which is the weapons of mass destruction. And it is this term that caught on post 9/11, when people were very scared of terrorists trying to use CBRN materials. And so therefore, the concept of radiological bombs or radiological devices, or what are commonly called as the dirty bombs, also came about. And in technological terms, it is called the radiological dispersal devices, RDD. So these are the kind of weapons which were now being thought of, now being studied, and the ease with which some of these weapons could be, made or acquired by the terrorist organizations came about, and therefore the interest changed, and the term from NBC became CB with an R in between and N. So it is the old NBC, which is now the CBRN. Uh, this term is now recognized across the world. Everybody calls it CBRN now. And you see, the concept initially, till about 2 decades ago, this particular subject was in the domain of the military only. It was not in the civil arena as such. But post 9/11, when people started talking about terrorists trying to use these weapons, and therefore this term came about in the civil defense, in the internal security, and things like that. At the same time, this term got expanded to a whole lot of other issues which are facing threats, which are facing mankind. It could be a chemical accident in an industry, like we have seen Bhopal, and you mentioned about Vizag last year. It could even be things like the Chernobyl accident in the nuclear power plant, or the Fukushima accident more recently in Japan, where a lot of radiation was exposed outside, and there was a hazard which was created. It could even be transportation accidents where you see, tankers carrying such material which meet with accidents, and there's a whole lot of release which takes place in the air around, which could be very hazardous again. So there are many such instances which are there. Coupled with that is the B aspect, which is the disasters from biological agents. Like you mentioned, we have seen the SARS, we have seen the MERS, we have seen swine flu, we have seen a recurring Ebola epidemics taking place in the Western African region. And of course, last 2 years now, or year and a half, I would say, we are faced with this uh, coronavirus, or COVID-19 as it is called. So that, CBRN doesn't just talk about nuclear weapons, or weaponization or things like that. CBRN covers from natural, that is from diseases or environmental issues and all, to accidental, to man-made, and to the warfare related issues. So the spectrum is pretty large, from natural threats, accidental, man-made threats, and to deliberate acts, whether it is terrorist acts, or it is a warfare kind of an act, where we have seen the bombings, we have seen the 1945 Hiroshima Nagasaki events, we have seen Syria, you mentioned, where a lot of chemical weapons have been used. So the spectrum is huge. Yeah.
Okay. They are supposed to be CBRN substances are supposed to be very, very deadly and toxic, and so I would want to ask you the effects of their usage on people and how lethal they are, particularly now as we see the recent example of Russia, where the opposition leader figure Alexei Navalny was poisoned. And there's a story that goes that Novichok nerve agent was planted in his underpants. So how deadly are these substances?
Yeah. CBRN agents are toxic agents, basically. So whether it is a chemical, whether it is a bio substance or a pathogen, or whether it is the radiation emitting substances, like your polonium, cesium, and so on. So these substances basically cause health hazard to humans and animals and plants and everything. Depending on what is the type of agent being used, and in what intensity, in what manner, the effect will be that much more or less on the population. Now, the difference between chemical, biological, and radiological weapons. I'm not talking of nuclear now, because the nuclear weapons, other than the damage and debris and everything which is there, what we are actually worried about is the radiation which it leaves behind. So I will keep that as R, and I will talk to you of C, B, and R threats. Now, in chemical weapons, what happens is, or chemical agents, what happens is the effect is immediate. And by and large, uh, people in a particular area exposed to a particular type of gas will have exactly the same kind of effect which each of them will be facing. For example, a gas exposure. All people in a particular room which is exposed to gas would have the same kind of effects. They would be coughing, they would be sneezing, they would be choking, and things like that will start happening. Whereas in a bioagent, what happens is, firstly, bioagent takes time to manifest. If there is a bioagent released today, depending on the incubation period or the manifestation period and the virulence of that particular agent, uh, people will develop symptoms of different kinds. Now, the symptoms may take from a few hours to almost 10, 20 days for manifestation. You've heard of coronavirus taking almost anything from 4 to 14 days for manifestation. So, that is the kind of effect which a bioagent will have. Now, the second part of the bioagent is, if it is a contagious kind of a bioagent, it's very difficult to control. A chemical agent I can spray on a particular area and everybody there will get affected. But when they go out from there, they are not going to start contaminating people unless the chemical agent is present with them. A lot of chemical agents are very volatile and not so persistent. So the effect of chemical agents is immediate and largely short-lived for that particular period when exposure is there. A bioagent will go on and on and on till you find a vaccine or you have herd immunity generated, or your internal immunity is so much that you may not have developed any symptoms at all. Like we are seeing a lot of asymptomatic cases in corona nowadays. As far as radiation is concerned, it's a very silent kind of a weapon. It starts showing its face only when the organs start getting affected after a little bit of time after exposure. There is no smell, there is no sound, there is no color, there is nothing for radiation which you can actually see. It is like, you stand in front of an X-ray machine getting X-rayed, you're being bombarded with radiation, but you don't see anything happening to you. So that is how radiation is going to be working. But intense radiation will start causing you discomfort, will start causing you internal injuries, skin burns, and so on and so. So that will start happening. So each of these agents are highly deadly agents. Each of these agents have their own peculiarities. And therefore, when we are looking at CBRN as a whole, we have to actually start identifying the threats from each of these agents in their own manners, and not take CBRN, okay, this is what has to be done. No, it will have to be studied and understood in its own manner from different place to different place. Coming to those examples which you said about Navalny getting poisoned by by the Russians, who's an opposition leader. Recent times, especially, we have seen nerve agents getting deployed in very singular kind of incidents. For example, we had the cousin brother of the ruler of North Korea getting swiped on his face in the Kuala Lumpur airport a few years ago with an agent which is the VX, which is a nerve agent. We also saw in Salisbury in UK that Novichok agent had been used, and Alexei Sergey was uh, poisoned. He and his daughter, they were sitting on the bench outside there. Now that Sergey was himself a Russian agent who had actually taken asylum in the UK. So such incidents which are happening, singular kind of incidents which are happening, have all shown in the recent past use of nerve agents, because nerve agents are actually the deadliest in the chemical agent category, the fastest acting and the deadliest acting in the chemical agent category. So therefore, they need to be each studied singularly and correctly to understand what kind of threats can be faced with that. Now, nobody really thought in Vizag, for example, that this factory which is there has this gas for ages together, and suddenly one fine day when the gas came out, the kind of effect which people saw. So that is why it needs to be studied carefully.
Okay. Which countries are infamous for resorting to CBR in war and threats? For example, what the names that strike me could be Iran, North Korea, China, Israel also. Yeah.
Okay. See, the concept of chemical warfare actually started during much before than World War One. But the major use of chemical weapons happened in World War One, when thousands and thousands of tons of chlorine, some cases phosgene, even mustard, sulfur mustard was used, which is actually a blister agent. That was used extensively, these agents in World War One. Uh, but the nerve agents came up in the scene during Second World Wars. For some reasons, they never got used in Second World War. But after that, most countries which were in researching on this subject developed nerve agents in a big manner. And today, nerve agents are one of the most feared agents as far as chemical warfare is concerned. Now, what happened was that while all this development, and so was bioagents getting developed, different types of disease pathogens were being researched on and developed in various countries. Uh, as of today, I would say, going by the reports that I have been reading, that there are still about 17, 18 countries which could be having chemical warfare agents and biological warfare agents. As far as nuclear weapons are concerned, well, there are 9 known nuclear weapon states. So we have the big 5, which is the USA, Britain, we have China, Russia, and I missed out one. Uh, and then, of course, we have India and Pakistan, and we have Israel with a question mark on North Korea. Uh, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. It was in the process of developing nuclear weapons. There was a cap put on their enrichment processes. They have pledged that they will only develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. But yes, there are a lot of question marks by Israel, especially, that Iran does continue to have a weaponization program. So we really don't know about that. So these are the countries which are researching on chemical agents, biological agents. By the way, even India had chemical warfare agents in 1993 when we had to declare our chemical stockpiles. We did that, and we had been given a mandate to destroy. So we destroyed all our chemical weapons because we were signatories to a convention which was there. So yes, there are still countries who are researching, who are. You see, what happens is when you are worried about your possible adversaries having such kind of weapons, you would like to research on these weapons and make vaccines, make antidotes, make drugs to cure yourself from such kind of threats. So for such kind of research, you require to generate that actual agent to be able to make a counter for that agent. So therefore, a whole lot of countries, especially the advanced countries, I feel, are all having research facilities capable of making any of these kind of agents.
So, Dr. Thavle, some CBRN attacks in the world that have had huge impact and disasters, if you could tell some of them to our audience.
Yeah. Uh, you see, we have seen, I mentioned about World War One, where Germany used tons and tons of chlorine on the Allied forces in France, in Belgium, even a little bit on the northern side, I would say. And they realized the goriness of these weapons. Uh, and of course, there were tens and thousands of casualties which happened. People died because of getting choked from breathing chlorine. Uh, in recent times, we saw the Syrian conflict, where a large amount of chlorine was used, large amount of agent, Sarin, Hussein regime in Iraq using sulfur mustard on the Kurdish rebels in 1988, the Halabja attack. So such instances have happened. There is also the Agent Orange, which is actually a defoliant, which was used extensively by the US in the Vietnam War. And a whole lot of people died because of the effects of Agent Orange, Agent Orange is a kind of a pesticide. It's meant to kill plants. But of course, if humans inhale it or ingest it in large quantities, it's going to affect them also. So that's what happened. And of course, a lot of hue and cry was made against the US for using that. Uh, there were a couple of terrorist incidents, where such kind of material has been used. We had the 1995 Tokyo metro attack, where Aum Shinriko, which is a cult group in Japan, uh, and they developed bioagents, especially anthrax. They also developed sarin. They tried to use it in 1994 unsuccessfully. And in 1995, they used it in the morning hours, rush hours, in metro trains, five of these trains going towards central Tokyo. And with great success, I would say, from their side, because almost 5,000 people got affected by sarin. Uh, they had 14 casualties. But because Japan, firstly, it was a metro train, so it was just a few minutes reaction which they got. And people in Japan, the doctors in Japan knew about such kind of things which were happening, and therefore they were prepared to start treatment in a very fast manner. But still, 14 people succumbed to this particular exposure of sarin. We have also seen, I mentioned to you about Sargi being done with uh, poisoned with the Novichok agent in Salisbury in UK. Navalny, you have said. So these incidents are happening with a greater frequency. There are also reports of the ISIS and the Al Qaeda trying to use chemical weapons. In fact, ISIS has used chemical weapons in Syria in large quantities. So it's not that these people don't have it. They have these technologies, they have the agents with them, and we need to be extremely careful and prevent proliferation of these agents to the wrong hands. So that is something which we need to be very careful about. If I may take a moment to tell you about something very disturbing which happened when I was in Africa, and it is something which the world needs to take note of. There was a very small, nondescript kind of a town in the southeastern part of Kenya, and in the government hospital there, in the pathological lab, there were intern doctors who were sitting, trained doctors, mind you. They were sitting and trying to stabilize anthrax, which they had extracted from animal carcasses. Uh, and they were trying to stabilize the anthrax spores and to make them transportable for use as a terrorist weapon for against Europeans in Europe, or even the government forces in Kenya or surrounding areas. And they were caught thanks to the Kenyan intelligence and the Interpol intervention. After interrogation, they found that there were two more people who were working in Uganda on such a kind of a project. There was another person caught in Ethiopia. So it was a whole network of trained, skilled doctors who were working on such kind of projects, trying to make pathogens, make bioagents transportable to be used against people, against common public as a terror weapon. They were all, they found that they were all members of the Al Shabaab terrorist organization, which is basically based in Somalia. Now, imagine there are so many pathological labs in the world. What kind of security measures do you have? What kind of oversight is there or enforcement is there of norms and restrictions? Who is checking what kind of work is going on in these pathological labs? especially in developing countries. So that brings us to the scary point that this kind of a weapon system can be made and by trained people, by skilled people who are part of such organizations. And it could be proliferating even as we talk today. So that is why the awareness on this subject is required to be increased for people to know more about this subject.
I remember, I think in India also we had some years ago the example of anthrax being coming in envelopes to people's places. That had created quite a scare amongst people. If I'm not wrong, that was some years
It
back.
happened. It happened. In fact, even last year, I think, or last to last year, if I'm not wrong, there was a laboratory somewhere in South India, which the enforcement agencies had actually caught. That laboratory was trying to do research on the Nipah virus. And you see, such kind of viruses, they require to be researched in laboratories which have the requisite containment facilities, the safety measures, the security measures. So laboratories are normally graded from biosafety level 1 to 4. Now, only biosafety level 3 and 4 are authorized to research on such kind of pathogen. Now, this laboratory was not a biosafety level 3 or 4 level laboratory, but it was carrying out research on Nipah virus, which is supposed to be at least BSL 3 level, if not more. So, luckily, the enforcement directorate got wind of this happening and they shut down that place and they restricted such kind of research from happening. There are a whole lot of regulations on these. So, luckily, we were able to stop that kind of a research.
On this note, I'd like to ask you whether we in India, do we have a strategy or a plan in place for CBR and security or threat?
Uh, we don't have a comprehensive CBRN strategy or CBRN security strategy, I would say. Uh, you see, in India, it's a vast country, firstly. And with the proliferation of industry, proliferation of uh, uh, what do you call chemicals and such kind of toxic material across the world, it is very difficult to have one comprehensive kind of a law on such kind of a thing. So we have in India almost about 100 plus laws. And mind you, we have some of the best laws on this subject. 100 plus laws dealing with different aspects of chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and so on. And which relates from production, from stockpiling, from transportation, from uh, you know uh, illegal use, smuggling, waste products, byproducts, and the whole gamut of this whole thing. Import, export, things like that. So all these laws are there. But what India actually needs is a comprehensive CBRN national security strategy. Why this is required is we need to understand that CBRN threats form part of national security paradigm. As of today, we are not looking at these threats as a national security threat. We have in India, we have nodal ministries which have been given the charge to look at C, B, or R and N. So for chemicals, we have the Ministry of Environment which is looking at it. So that means we are looking at chemicals primarily as environmental threats. We have a Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, but the issue of chemicals is not with the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, it's with the Ministry of Environment. Because we are looking at what is the health hazard from these chemicals, and therefore it is under the Ministry of Environment. Similarly, we have the bio part under the Ministry of Health. You can see now what is happening for COVID. It is the Ministry of Health, which is the nodal ministry, which is giving all the guidelines and all. For radiological and nuclear, we have the Department of Atomic Energy, which has the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board controlling everything in India. But there is nothing as far as CBR and security, national security is concerned, wherein we would have the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Home Affairs, which looks after the internal security. So nothing at the national level where CBR and national security is looked at in a comprehensive manner. We need to start working on that kind of an issue. We have the response part of it is looked at by the National Disaster Management Authority, where it takes, like it is dealing with other disasters, it is also the agency nominated by the Government of India to deal with CBRN disasters. But that means that it is a post-disaster agency, a consequence management agency. It is not a pre-disaster agency. It is not a preventive kind of a measure. It is a response measure. So that is where I think we need to still focus on the preventive part. And one of the issues which I feel we should look at is CBRN intelligence. If the thing started in Wuhan in November, somewhere alarms and lights should have started going off in your intelligence community, in your scientific community, in your security community, that look, this is happening and this can become a threat, and therefore we need to start working on that. It didn't happen. So, and not only us, it's across the world, people were caught up in unawares when the corona thing happened. So I think CBRN intelligence is an area which needs to be focused on.
You made a very, very important and pertinent point about this CBRN intelligence. The government, I'm sure, should be doing with but so many ministries spread over to where the task is not with one centralized ministry. So that I think can create a lot of confusing situation and no accountability, of course. Then that matters. But then moving on, I would want to ask, how can we save ourselves from this threat like this, how can we prepare ourselves, our citizens, in case of any threat of this kind coming from abroad?
That's a very important question, because if this question had been even partially addressed, today we wouldn't have been in the state we are in the COVID situation. Okay, I will take this question in two parts. First is the preparation from the administration side or from the government side or from looking at it from that angle. There needs to be a visionary planning on what could happen. What are the kinds of threats which could emerge? What is the level of preparation required for all these kinds of things? I can understand that you cannot really prepare for a threat in a manner that, okay, today we require a 1,000-bed hospital, so therefore we must create a 5,000-bed hospital and keep it. When in normal times, not even one wing of or one ward of that 5,000 bed would possibly be in use. So it would be a wasteful kind of an expenditure. Perfectly fine. But you must have or plan for contingencies where you should be able to scale up in a shortest time frame to meet such kind of surge requirements. What you saw in the COVID in the last. The second is anticipating the kind of wherewithal and therefore creating reserves, creating buffers. For example, last year, when the first wave came, we should have known that there's going to be a second wave, there is going to be a third wave, obviously. We saw it happening in the Western world much before the second wave hit us. So when we saw that there is a second wave and there is a third wave which is coming outside, well, we should be ready for that, and we should not become complacent. We should not put down guard down. That is the kind of thing which is expected from the administration side. You know, that kind of visionary planning, that these kind of things. And that's why I again reiterate the point. We never thought of it as a security risk. We always thought of it as a health risk. And therefore, we just allowed the Ministry of Health to manage the whole thing. Had we taken it as a national security problem, things would have been different. You know, you suddenly scale up everything because it's a national security problem and not just a health problem. So from the administration side, we have all the documents, we have all the wherewithal as far as that is the written part is concerned or the legal part is concerned. Yes, some of our laws and things require revisions and all that, but that's a routine kind of a process which takes place. But what happens is when you develop the measures to counter such kind of things. For example, today, as far as radiation is concerned, the government has set up radiation emergency centers across the country. Very few people are aware of that. But we have across the country these radiation emergency centers set up by the government, by the Department of Atomic Energy, with the help of DARC. So these centers are spread across the country to monitor what is the level of radiation going up and down. And in case there is a spike somewhere, going and investigating what exactly that is. Similarly, in a bio kind of a situation, we have a complete biosurveillance program across the country, managed under an organization under the Ministry of Health. Now, this biosurveillance program is on a day-to-day basis, monitoring different kinds of diseases prevalent in various parts of the country. And any changes, anything, and this data is tabulated on a daily basis, mind. Through satellite links, all this is put in a central server and the whole thing is managed accordingly. So we have such kind of things. Our problem is chemical management. Chemicals have proliferated so much in industry that it is extremely difficult to keep tag of who is taking what kind of chemicals. And the reason is there are a whole lot of chemicals which are commonly used in industry for legitimate purposes. So how do you really keep track of what is happening? For example, just you take ammonium nitrate. It's an ingredient for fertilizers. It, at the other far end, it is also an ingredient for explosives. So you need to be very careful of how much of ammonium nitrate is being used by which company for what use, what is the end product, who's going to be the end user, how much are people buying this, where is it actually going, is it really being legitimately used for what it was made for, and so on. What is happening to the waste products, what is happening to the byproducts. Now we have an oversight mechanism under the Ministry of Environment to handle all this. So such kind of things have been done by the government to ensure these problems don't happen. But there will be problems, there will be accidents. We come now to the public side of it. How should public look at it? The main thing which public requires is raising of awareness on this. I am very thankful to COVID, frankly speaking, for having raised awareness among the public on at least be part of it. That yes, there can be diseases. I see a whole lot of my friends and colleagues uh, reading on the internet on black fungus, variants of corona, and things like that. That kind of awareness has come. That okay, it is not just corona, it is so many other things which are happening along with that. Medications, what does each medication do? So these are the kind of things which people have started learning. I don't say that you require a incident to happen for people to start learning that. I would actually ask people, and that's an appeal from my side, please learn about these things before that incident happens so that you are that much safe in case something happens. And we need to therefore run educational programs, we need to run awareness campaigns, we need to actually have workshops, especially for people who are in the higher vulnerable bracket. For example, people working in chemical industries, people working in hospitals where such kind of toxic materials are more, people in transportation industry who are on a day-to-day basis handling tons and tons of such toxic material, people in customs, people from the police and paramilitary who would be the first responders coming on such sites. So we need to actually start looking at raising awareness of these common people, our civic workers. In the last few months, I have read so many news articles where civic workers have been sent to clean sewage without proper gear, and they have succumbed to all the toxic gases which are there inside. So it's a basic thing that that man requires to save his life. It's not that we don't have these kind of sets or these kind of personal protective equipment or things like that in India. I can vouch for it that we have one of the best industrial base for manufacturing all these kinds of products. Much before COVID, I had been in touch with a company which manufactures some of the best respirator masks. They have been exporting that. In fact, I collaborated with them and we have developed a mask for the Indian Army. Similarly, the same thing goes for suits. Today, India has got a world approved CBRN suit for its own, made purely by an Indian company in Coimbatore. So we have that kind of expertise, but the knowledge is not spreading. We need that kind of a knowledge spread. That's how we will be able to save ourselves.
Dr. Thavle, you talked at length about the substances effect inside the country domestically, particularly related to corona. Now, if you could tell us a little about these CBRN threats from outside the country. Say, I mean, I would like to ask you, can a CBRN threat be there from, say, our neighbors like China, Pakistan? So a threat that is coming from outside, how would you respond to this?
Okay. Firstly, as a state, uh, there are international protocols which are there, developed under the United Nations umbrella, which, if the state is signatory to that protocol, they are banned from creating, developing, stocking, using any of these kind of materials. Sorry. So there are protocols for bio. We have also a protocol for the chemicals, and there is a whole lot of treaties and agreements which are there to prevent material which could be used in making nuclear arsenals or nuclear warheads. So those kind of protocols and treaties, conventions are existing. And both our neighbors, in fact, all our neighbors actually, are signatories to these treaties. So using these kind of materials in an open conventional warfare situation, I have my doubts, except the nuclear part, because nuclear is governed by different kinds of protocols and treaties. But as far as chemical and biological is concerned, there are treaties which, there are conventions which actually ban on use of these kind. And all these countries are signatories, so I don't see them using this in a warfare situation. But nothing stops non-state actors or terrorists, could be individually on their own or even sponsored, where they could be made to use these kind of material against India. And that's where, again, I get back to the same thing, the ease of availability of the material within our country. So they don't require to transport it from outside to us. Material which is being used normally in industry could be used to target you. I mean, just imagine what happened at Vizag, for example. It was a accident because of not correct maintenance of the gas tank, the styrene tanks and things like that, and therefore there was a leak which happened. The temperature was not being controlled properly. There was a mismatch in the temperature settings and things. So, but imagine somebody sabotaging this kind of a deliberately, causing a release, or getting this kind of a material and releasing it in a highly crowded place. Like, for example, you're from Delhi, so you would know what Sarojini Market is, for example. On a Saturday afternoon or evening, there is no standing place in that kind of a market. So imagine if this kind of a release happens in such kind of highly crowded places, or an IPL final match for that matter. Or
even in Mumbai is also,
yeah,
markets are very crowded.
every city of ours has got populated market areas, populated public places. We have got very important tourist sites. We have got critical infrastructure in our country which could also be targeted. And each of these needs different kind of CBRN security paradigm to be applied. In fact, I have had the opportunity to be part of some projects where such critical infrastructure protection was carried out for CBRN. I was also part of the team when we planned for the CBRN protection during the Commonwealth Games in Delhi in 2010. So it's a mind-boggling exercise to really, uh, plan out and execute CBRN security for such kind of major events which are taking. We recently had the Kumbh. I mean, there were millions of people going for such kind of thing. So this kind of vulnerability gets generated because of our high population rates and crowded places and things like that. All the more reason for people to be educated on this. So therefore, such kind of things, not directly from our neighbors or from adversaries, I should say, but indirectly, terrorist-sponsored kind of a thing, highly possible. And therefore, not only the citizen, but our police forces, our first response, our hospitals, our paramedics, everybody needs have basic awareness on what kind of threats can emerge.
There is also a report of the UN where it says that it has laws regarding trafficking of substances.
Yes.
Where do you think these substances get trafficked from? Which place to which place? You think Afghanistan or uh,
Okay.
wherever?
No, you see,
How does
it is
this
not a
trafficking
particular place
module work?
actually. Yeah, I'll explain to you how and what are the protocols. Let me first cover how it is happening, and then I will tell you what are the protocols for that. Uh, about I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 2016, if I'm not wrong, the Pakistan customs uh, actually apprehended a huge amount of acetic anhydride in the port of Karachi. They got a tip off that something is amiss and this huge consignment is arriving, and the Pakistani customs got into the act and they actually apprehended that whole consignment. It was some 140 tons or something like that. I don't really remember the exact quantity, but it was huge. Uh, Now, acetic anhydride is used for refining poppy into drugs. So obviously the target was the area of Afghanistan and the northwestern provinces of Pakistan and that area, which are poppy growing area, which are producers of the drugs. So when they caught this, they wanted to track it back, and they found that the paper said Tanzania. So the matter went to Interpol, and they started investigating the whole thing, and they soon realized that Tanzania does not have any factory or any enterprise where such quantities of acetic anhydride can be manufactured. So where has it come from? So then they started tracing it back, and you believe you me, there were 5 owners changed across the seas of the world, and it originated somewhere else in Southeast Asia somewhere. I think it was from one of the countries there. I don't want to name the country. So it originated somewhere there, and it traveled from there all across, changing 5 owners, and finally landing up in Pakistan. Meant for you know what. So so that is how this trafficking happens. But that is a singular element, a singular chemical by itself is moving. But let us take a more complex example. A firm in X country is making metal products for various industrial uses. You have boilers, you have mixers, you have centrifuges, you have so many things which are there in industry, which are used for various processes, different kinds of industry. It could be steel industry, it could be automobile, it could be automobile parts, it could be a chemical industry, or even textile for that matter. Now, the same material can also be used in trying to purify or refine or enrich, if I may use the right term, uh, uranium for that matter. So the same component could be a part of a centrifuge used for enrichment of uranium. But it starts its life as a very, very docile kind of a module, which could be for so many other industries. So such kind of material are termed as dual use substances or dual use materials. Now, these dual use materials have also been listed out by under the United Nations and various other protocols also, uh, where a lot of arms control agreements have gone into, not just at the United Nations level, but at regional level also. You must have read a few days ago that India has become part of the Wassenaar Agreement and also the Australia Group and all these. What are these These are protocols which are restricting movement of these dual-use goods to certain parts of the world. See, if India is manufacturing something, we are under these obligations not to send it to X, Y, Z countries. Why? Because it may be used in a wrong manner, and that is what is felt at. So such kind of binding agreements and conventions have been made, some under the United Nations, some bilateral, some regional, and so on. So they prevent such kind of trafficking of material from one place to another, not just within the country, but globally. There is also something called, for example, the PSI, the Proliferation Security Initiative, started by the United States, where on the open seas, if you come to know that a particular ship could be carrying something, and you have this proliferation security initiative with other countries, maybe that particular country, if they get an input from the US that there's a ship in your waters which is likely to be carrying this, then it gives them that authority to go and board the ship and take charge of whatever. So such kind of interventions can be carried out if you are part of these kind of protocols and if you're collaborating with the intelligence and so on. So proliferation movement, not just of chemicals, but even biological substances, live biological specimens. It could be plant specimens which are infected, and it could, of course, be material, weapons, which could be then used in a malified manner.
That is quite in-depth information that Dr. Tavle you've given us. My next question to you will be: how is CBR and security related to disaster management? We've seen so many disasters just
Yeah.
lately.
So, you see, for example, now we had Vizag last year. We had the styrene gas release from the factory in the wee hours of the morning. And now, how does it? The first thing is disaster management. Now, disaster management happens under the NDMA in India, National Disaster Management Authority. And for execution on ground, because NDMA makes the policies and the guidelines. But who is the one who actually physically goes on ground and manages that disaster? So that comes under the district headquarters, or in a city, it comes under the municipal headquarters. Now, they have a disaster management cell at the municipal level. They have a district disaster management authority. Going up at the state level, they have a state disaster management authority. And all of this comes under the umbrella of the National Disaster Management Authority. But these are offices. These are people sitting on desks, making policies, making guidelines, coordinating things, sending people, sending equipment here and there. But who are actually physically reporting to the site where a disaster has happened?
Hmm.
Let's take it from the beginning of a disaster, for example. The first thing what any citizen would do is call up the police station and tell them, look, this is what has happened. So your local beat policeman becomes your first responder. Thereafter, if there's a fire situation, maybe before the police, the fire brigade would be called. It's a chemical factory, there's a fire which is raging, there's toxic fumes coming out from that chemical which is burning. So you require a fire department to be there. But the skilled CBR and responders in India are the National Disaster Response Force. We have 12 such battalions today. There are 4 more which have been sanctioned, but due to COVID, the whole process has got delayed. So each of these battalions have 18 teams of 45 personnel each. Each team has got a medical component and a response component, which will have technicians, which will have people who are trained to, earth moving equipment and things like that, cutting into girders and, all kinds of such disaster equipment is available to these. Now, in every battalion, amongst these 18 teams, one team is trained and equipped for CBRF. Now, this process has not yet got completed in all the battalions. But we have, I think there are now 5 or 6 battalions which have this capability or this expertise already generated and existing in the NDRF. Efforts are on to duplicate the whole thing to all the NDRF battalions. Now, and mind you, our expertise in this kind of a thing is very high. When the Fukushima crisis happened, the government of Japan requested India for a team to assist them in the disaster management part of it. And we had a team, especially configured from the NDRF battalion based at Pune, which has people trained in radiological disasters specifically. So this team had been lifted from here and sent to Japan to assist them, and they came back with a lot of accolades for the kind of work that our people did there. The same thing happened after the styrene gas leak happened in Vizag. For the investigation and for the analysis of the whole thing, the NDRF teams had been pulled in. A specialist from NDRF teams had been pulled in and sent there to see what is happening. But our problem is not that. Our problem is when an incident happens, there is something called a golden hour, which is the first 1 hour, especially in a CBRN kind of a situation. If you are able to respond within the first 1 hour, you will be able to save a lot of casualties. With just 12 battalions in the country, or even if we have 16 and you count all of them, it is a very, very low footprint within the whole country today. Imagine a battalion staying in Pune is responsible for the whole of Maharashtra and Goa. Now, just travel between Pune and Aurangabad itself will take about 5 hours. So how do you respond to a particular situation? So under the Prime Minister's orders, and this happened during Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, that all states had been told to raise state disaster response forces. And the present government has actually managed to push this. And almost all states today have got, in some form or the other, a state disaster response force. Now, these some states, the bigger states, have got more than 1 battalions, I think. But these battalions are going to be trained and equipped on the lines of the NDRF to increase the footprint within the area so that the reaction is that much faster. And so that is the kind of response that we are generating. That is the kind of preparation that we have got on ground today. Now, when such these disasters occur, as a specialist in this subject, I would say our first task is prevention of this disaster. What I've told you till now is how are things happening when a disaster has happened. But our main task, and that should always be our first focus point, is prevention of a disaster, especially of a CBRN disaster. Or if you know that it is going to happen, at least isolate the issue in such a manner that there is no escalation taking place at all, which will save lives. So I go back to CBRN intelligence, which I talked of in the beginning. It is not just international CBRN intelligence which is required. It is internal intelligence. It is domestic. It is district-wise. It is taluka-wise. It is state-wise. And there needs to be such apparatus built up to be able to tell you, okay, this is likely to happen. Please prevent it. And I would actually extend this whole thing to the private sector. For example, in Vizag, I'm going back to that example because it is a very recent one and people are aware of it. The management of the company, the staff of the company, the people who are the security people of the company, they should all have had that kind of training, that kind of oversight, that kind of responsibility that, yes, I must ensure that nothing goes wrong in my system. Even if there's a lockdown, there was a 15% staff allowed to be there to ensure maintenance of everything. Now, that diligence by these people to ensure that things don't go wrong checking of these systems, checking of meters, checking of boilers, checking of valves, temperatures, monitoring, all these kinds of things. It's a personal issue. And that kind of diligence requires to be brought in every person to save lives.
Dr. Thavle, you spent a major portion of your life in the army. Uh, I would like to ask, does the defense train its soldiers for CBRN security and threat, or is there a regime in that itself, or
Okay.
where else otherwise?
Yeah. Yeah. You see, as far as the defense forces are concerned, like I mentioned, up to 2 decades ago, CBRN, or uh, of course, when I did my training and my predecessors or my peers, we called it NBC only. Uh, that used to be a subject. It's been a subject for us since almost the early 80s, I would say, or late 70s. Uh, India detonated its first test device in 1974. So, CBRN has been with the armed forces right since then. And we have been training our personnel in CBRN defense, in protection part, for a very long time. And we have developed a great amount of expertise in that subject. We have, for the Indian Army and the Air Force, we have in the College of Military Engineering in Pune, we have a complete faculty of CBRN protection, where regular training is given to non-commissioned officers, to enlisted men, to officers, and even specialist training to management level people, senior officer cadre, who would be able to handle a wartime situation with these kind of disasters happening, or these kind of wartime situations taking place. A lot of such training is going on. Excellent kind of setup that they have with laboratories, with training areas, with all kinds of models and things like that. An extensive library to back it up. I am a faculty, a visiting faculty to that place. Of course, I did my basic training also in CBRN at that same faculty long back in 1995. We have a similar facility at INS Lonavala, INS Shivaji in Lonavala, where the NBC or CBRN training is imparted for the naval people. So as far as the armed forces are concerned, they have training facilities. They are prepared for these kind of threats. They have equipping for all these kinds of things. Uh, but our concern, like I mentioned in the beginning, is now in the last about 2 decades, has been the non-military aspects of this. How do you prepare for such kind of things happening in the civil street? I mentioned to you about NDRF being your skilled first responders for CBRN, and hopefully later on the SDRF takes on also. At the same time, we also have the CISF, which are at airports and all our critical establishments, which are manned by the CISF, which is a major security force in the country. Our borders are being managed by the BSF, the uh, what do you call Indo-Tibetan Border Police. We have the Assam Rifles. We have the Seema Suraksha Bal. So all these forces which are there, which have contributed a battalion each for, or maybe 2 battalions each for the NDRF, also run within their own training centers a NBC school for giving basic training to all their soldiers. As far as the main training for paramilitary forces is concerned, at Hyderabad, there is an academy called NISA, National Industrial Security Academy. It is the CISF academy actually, but they are conducting NBC training or CBRN training for all NDRF battalions, for IPS officers, and so on. So all that level of CBRN training is being conducted at Hyderabad. In addition, there is a new NDRF training center which is getting established, which will also take on the CBRN training for all NDRF battalions. So that is the kind of training which is there for military as well as for the paramilitary and the central police organizations which we have.
Okay. Dr. Tavle, there was, after the Second World War, how it ended, we know in 1945 they bombed Japan, and the world changed since then. Do you see any possibility of a nuclear kind of nuclear kind of a threat in these days, particularly.
Attack, you mentioned. Okay.
Every second country is a nuclear powered country.
No, I wouldn't say that. We have, like I mentioned, there are 9 nuclear weapon states today in the country. 5 which are self-proclaimed managers of the nuclear issue, and they call themselves the recognized nuclear powers. India and Pakistan and Israel and North Korea and all don't come under the recognized nuclear powers, but this recognition has been given by those 5 to themselves. So I don't accept that kind of thing. But nevertheless, nuclear weapons after 1945, there have been umpteen instances where the world has come very close to a nuclear conflagration. We have seen the Cuban crisis, which actually brought us closest to during the Cold War period. We have seen the Indo-Pak wars, again, when there was the hanging threat of a nuclear weapon being used by our adversary. But all said and done, I feel nuclear weapons today have become more of deterrence value than an actual weapon for battlefield. And mind you, when I say battlefield, there are even small nuclear weapons called tactical nuclear weapons, which have been developed for use on the immediate battlefield, not targeting cities and towns and things like that, but targeting battlefield forces from each other's armies. So such kind of weapons have also got developed, especially our Western adversary has always been saying that we have the tactical nuclear weapons to use. But again, a nuclear weapon is more of a deterrence value. Nuclear doctrines from most countries, most of these nuclear weapon states, I would say, except Pakistan and North Korea, talk of no first use. That means I will not use nuclear weapon unless somebody uses a nuclear weapons against me. So if nobody is using a nuclear weapon, and if that other country also has that kind of a doctrine, so I am not using a nuclear weapon till he uses, and he also says I will not use till you use one. So either way, we are not using. So it is more of a deterrence, trying to find which is the breaking point after which I don't have any choice. I will have to use a nuclear. So that breaking point, because of this deterrence value of, or deterrence diplomacy, if I may use this term, this threshold has kept going up and up. And therefore, you have nuclear weapons, you have a might, you have a punch. You can use it if you want, but I will not use it till I am pushed to the back. So it is more of a deterrence and less of a actual use battle. You see, you hear of conflicts, across the borders at a number of places. We had the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. We have seen Syrian conflict. We have seen our line of control keeps having, lighted up every second day between our two forces on the either side. A lot of, including artillery duels, take place. But we have never gone to that level of a nuclear. It's a threat in being. It's a threat which is there, not likely to be used, but can be used. So that can be used is the threat. That is the deterrence value of these weapons. And I think these weapons are more valued for the deterrent value than for actual use. And I don't think any country in its right mind would be using these weapons in a situation.
Plus also the factor that, in case of any conflict that just arises in any part of the world between two countries, others immediately pitch in. That globalization kind of scene is because that sense behind the mind also that maybe if this one is a nuclear powered country, then we need to all come in and play an advisory role.
That always is there.
Yeah. So a recent Israel Hamas conflict also, although it went for 11 days, but I think it's countries that have pitched in, particularly Egypt has played a good role, I think, this time. And so the conflict has been contained. So that's one good plus point and a deterrent to nuclear.
That's right.
Okay,
in fact,
now,
last year, They have also, some countries have got together and also enacted under the United Nations a nuclear test ban treaty. Not nuclear test ban treaty that exists already. There is a nuclear weapons ban treaty. We already have the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, which bans the use of these kind of weapons in biological weapons or toxin weapons in any kind of situation. We have the Chemical Weapons Convention under the UN, managed by the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which bans even production or stockpiling or any kind of thing on toxic chemicals. Similarly, they have now developed, last year it got ratified, is the Nuclear Weapons Convention, which bans production of nuclear weapons or use of nuclear weapons in any kind of war situation. So it remains to be seen how many countries really are going to get become signatories to this particular convention on nuclear weapons.
So how now with these threats, CBR and security is a major issue. How do you think people who want to study or train, how can we train people in this field? And
The
where,
last
suppose a
sentence.
student, where can it go to study, and what are the prospects?
Okay, I believe your question is on the training of or education on CBRN
Education.
for the general public. Well, there are presently our high schools and our colleges do have a curriculum on disaster management. And I very strongly feel that a part about CBRN disasters, CBRN threats, or CBRN risk mitigation can be included as part of this particular curriculum, so that a basic understanding, basic awareness, or basic knowledge on CBRN threats and how our country is geared up for response should be given to all the students. That is part one, which is not there at the moment. And I strongly feel we should start that. The second aspect is none of our medical colleges are actually training doctors on CBRN casualties. Doctors are highly trained in their own various fields on various aspects of the bio part. That's the job. But what happens in a chemical situation? Are all the doctors trained to handle a chemical situation? Are all the doctors trained to handle a radiological kind of a injury? Not all. I'll give you an example. There was an incident happened in Delhi in Mayapuri, where there was a radiation leak incident, which happened in a scrapyard in Mayapuri, Delhi in
Yes.
2010. Uh, the initial response of a doctor when he saw this patient with a rash on his body was that it is just a rash. Use this ointment, apply it for a couple of days. I think the rash should go. So he failed to recognize this as a radiation injury. So what happens is that detailed training as part of the curriculum on CBRN, except the Armed Forces Medical College, which has, of course, part of its curriculum for CBRN casualty management. I think all medical colleges must have this. I did a webinar for an organization called CAHO, a consortium of hospital and healthcare uh, organizations or something like that. And I took this webinar on how hospitals need to be prepared to handle CBRN threats, not just outside of the hospital, but also within the hospital. You always talk of disease when you're in the hospital, but nobody talks of chemical threat or a radiological threat. Today, we have big hospitals having, radiation therapy units. You have the CAT scan departments and so on. There is a lot of radioactive sources within a hospital. So every such hospital has got a radiation safety officer who's deputed there. He's a doctor, but he's trained at the BARC on a radiation safety course. Now, I would like to expand this course to be a CBRN safety course so that doctors are trained to handle a CBRN situation, not just radiation. And that is just one guy who's in that radiation department. The rest of the doctors are not trained on that. So I think we need to expand this as far as medical. The third stage, which I would say,
other than a general student or a general,
yeah, I'm
how
coming
does
to
he
that.
gain into CBRE?
I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
The next stage, which I think is that we need to graduate from that high school and college disaster management curriculum to specialized CBRN courses. I am a visiting faculty to the University of Rome, which is one of the few universities, I think it is the only university, which runs a UN recognized master's course in CBRN protection. I'm honored to be a visiting faculty to that university and teaching students at that level on CBRN protection aspects. Now, nowhere in India do we have a course where a common citizen, a student, can go and enroll himself or herself in such a course. So I had been seized with this issue for a very long time, and it was one of my sort of aims which I set for myself, that we must start such courses in India. We must graduate to teaching people, common people, on what such kind of threats is. And the first thing which came to my mind was, okay, let's not start at that level, but let us start a little lower. So I published a book on this subject, and this book came out in 2019, which was one of my attempts to do this kind of awareness generation or visibility enhancement on this subject. Recently, I have collaborated with a couple of universities, and one of the universities, which is University of Pune, Savitribai Phule Pune University, which has a Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. And they have started a lot of postgraduate diploma courses on various security and safety aspects. And one of these courses is a postgraduate diploma in CBRN protection and national security. I am the lead faculty for that course. We have started this course from the year 2021, that is this year. We have finished with the first semester of this course already. It's a 2-semester course. So presently we are having the break between the 2 semesters, and we would be taking on this next semester in I think from mid-June or July onwards. The second semester would be starting. Being the first course and a postgraduate diploma level course, we have managed to get 4 students as of now. We are hoping to enlarge the capacity in the next course onwards and train more people on the subject. And it's very heartening for me to see the kind of interest shown by the students. Somebody has done biotechnology, somebody has done economics, somebody is, so they have graduated in these kind of fields, but they have shown interest to learn CBRN as a subject.
So you mean people from any background can do it, whether it is economics or arts or science? They don't particularly need to have science background.
Yes. Science background does give you a little bit of advantage, because there are certain things in CBRN which helps you understand the subject much better.
Yeah.
But as far as the management aspects are concerned, or the response aspects are concerned, I don't think there is a need for having a science background specifically. I feel that anybody who has the interest can always read up on these issues and empower themselves, enrich themselves with that kind of a knowledge, and still be CBRN specialists, or in their own right. I mean, so that is the kind of thing which we have started. I'm also talking to another university for starting a similar kind of a thing in India today and expanding this issue. I'm hoping my book helps in this kind of a thing.
Finally, quick 4, 5 or any amount of points that you would like to advise the government on CBRN security.
Okay. The first thing which I would want the government to do is please look at CBRN as a national security issue and make out a comprehensive national security strategy, work out a plan, pan India, get all the states on board, and institute this plan. The second is have a department or an agency for internal security dedicated, within which you must have a department dealing with CBRN security internally. because the internal threats are more. Like I mentioned to you, the battlefield threats are getting less and less. It is these threats which are going to manifest more within us, within our environment. So therefore, it is an internal security issue, and we must focus on that issue as such. And the third is strengthen up your CBRN response mechanisms. 12 battalions is just not doing it. Paramilitary forces, your police forces. I was talking to some police officers before the COVID started off. I wanted to do workshops for the police. I was appalled to see that police forces don't have any CBRN training. And we must get our police forces trained, because in a situation, it is the police, local police, which is going to be the first people on the site. And if they are going to go bumbling into a release which has happened in a particular area, they are going to become victims themselves. So we need to make them aware. We need to empower them. We need to give them basic equipment so that when they go into a situation, it could be just a bomb going off or an explosion taking place somewhere. And if the police just goes in there and it's actually a chemical release, you'll have, where there are one casualty or two casualties, you'll have 30 police casualties. So we don't want that kind of a situation. So I think the government must look at these three issues: the top, that is the strategy part of it, the management part of it, and the response part of it. And of course, all this requires awareness and education at every level, from top to bottom of the government and of course the public.
What
Before I close, I
last,
would like to actually introduce my book to you all.
I was just coming to that. If you could just introduce your book quickly to us. What is it about?
Yeah, so my book is Toxic Portents. It is titled Toxic Portents, but it is basically on CBRN incident management in India. This book is actually a compilation, I would say, of my experience. When I worked with the European Union in Africa for 3 years, teaching, advising governments of 11 countries on CBRN risk mitigation, having seen the CBRN build up in India as to how we are geared up for all this. And I felt that there is a lot to be done within the country. And I put all these things together and I wrote this book. It has a foreword by one of the member secretaries of the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, who was a very renowned, or who is a very renowned expert on CBRN himself, Dr. D.N. Sharma. And the other member secretary of the NDMA at that time, General Marwa, NC Marwa. He was kind enough to come and release this book. And he mentioned during his speech while releasing my book that I wish this book becomes one of the textbooks for CBRN teaching in our country. So I feel very blessed for my book to have been, given that kind of appraisal by these people from the topmost authority in India. And I would appeal to people to pick it up. It is not a technical book. It is a book for every person to read, every person to learn from. And do get back to me if you feel that you want to learn more about this, know more about this, or you want me to correct something in the book. You're most welcome to do that. But get aware of this subject. That is the main message which I would like to convey. So this book is available on Amazon. The book is available on Amazon.in as a hardbound, also as a Kindle copy, or you can go to the publishers and pick it up yourself. There's no problem at all.
So there have been really, really very insightful talk. He's told us that we are really lacking and falling short on our CBRN security issues. I think India needs to do a little more. The government needs to really look at CBRN security as a thing of priority, even whether it is domestic inside or it is from outside. Thank you so much, Dr. Thavle, for having talked to us and given us such wonderful information about CBRN, which is generally not available outside and which people really don't know so much about. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Preeti. Thank you for getting me on this and allowing me to share my thoughts. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you so much.